Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Church as we fast approach the season that celebrates the birth of Jesus. We as Unitarian Universalists are often queried as to how we can possibly justify rejoicing in the spirit of Christmas, since the myths of old have little or no bearing on our theology and beliefs. And so this morning, Monica and I will tackle both a Unitarian and a Universalist perspective on Jesus, hoping to provide some legitimacy to liberal theology that still makes room for Jesus. Christmas falls in the darkest time of the year, not only because of where it's placed on the calendar, although that's related, but also as a reminder of the all-pervasive darkness in society, a darkness that we experience where there seems to be an intentionality that human suffering is ignored while simultaneously greed is rationalized. And so we are moved to address this in many different traditions, usually by lighting candles that symbolically disperse the darkness while offering hope. So we've got Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Christmas, all pursue bringing light into the world's darkness. Now, the candles come in many different shapes and sizes. Sometimes it's a surprise. For example, sometimes the shape of a candle can take the shape of Alabama. It shines hope and peace and common sense upon a darkened land. And like all manifestations of light piercing a dark world, it inspires us, and I'm speaking specifically now of the light in the shape of Alabama. It inspires us never to give up. Keep on with our work, because we ultimately are the ones who have to create a better world. Symbol of light and of knowledge, symbol of warmth and freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love. So may we open our service, turning our hymn books, please, to number 42.
Oh As we enter into a time of meditation, please allow me to digress from the topic of today's worship and from the seasonal joy that surrounds us, because even though we are free to join together in worship here and shut out the troubles of the world for a brief hour, the clouds of tyranny continue to gather in the skies of our beloved country. One of the responsibilities of ministry, and indeed of living a life of faith, is the responsibility to defy threats to freedom. Words have power, and even if the institutions of our government are banned from using certain words, their power cannot be diminished. So let us enter into not only a spirit of prayer or meditation, but into a spirit of resistance as we summon hope and courage for the coming week. Mighty Protector, we come to this place today in the joy of the season and in gratitude for the rich diversity of this beautiful world we inhabit. Yet we recognize that the freedom we cherish faces greater threats each day. We cry out for justice, but not just any justice. We demand justice that is science-based and evidence-based. We demand justice for those who are most vulnerable in this world, including, and not limited to, those who are transgender. We recognize the holy entitlement to justice for all persons who were once fetuses. We pray for the strength to lift our voices, even when they shake, and the courage to refuse to be silenced. Like a tree that is planted by the rivers of water, we shall not be moved. So may it be.
Well, again, a welcome to all of you, and a special welcome to those who are with us for the first time this morning, or relatively new. Hope that you get a a good, warm sense about this particular congregation, a religious community. We have a lovely welcoming table right outside this door that's en route to our all-important coffee hour, and you will learn to love coffee hour over time and appreciate its significance in the life of this church. Please notice in all of your announcements, of course, they're the obvious, all the holiday services that are planned, including tonight. Christmas Cool at Jazz Vespers. It's going to be closing out our 29th season of Jazz Vespers. We have a wonderful vocalist joining our house band, our wonderful Jazz Vespers quartet. It is absolutely a wonderful time. Every year we've been closing out the season with Christmas Cool. And if you're kind of on the fence about whether or not you've been infected by the Christmas season and you want to be, come tonight and you will leave definitely in a whole new spirit, frame of mind regarding the holidays. So in addition to the obvious holiday announcements, and please take a look at those in the order of service, I've got three other important announcements. I don't know, some of them didn't make it in. First, those of you, and there are many of you, who have been so involved and ready to help in the best volunteer spirit we can imagine, and that is, I'm alluding to the sanctuary. I don't really have an update other than things seem to be remaining pretty much kind of static. Family has not been deported. We know that their lawyer is discussing matters with representatives of ICE, and so I'm going to ask you to please just be patient and wait with us. We are ready to swing into action and provide the service that we hope to provide for a family that is having great difficulties with this deportation business. In order to help, now our mindset is certainly, if it's not going to be, today that we offer sanctuary, it will happen soon. And one of the things that will be required is that we have hosts, 2 hosts that spend the night here together with the family. I mean, obviously separate quarters and all that. And right after church this morning at about 10:15, there will be a brief, just a half hour most, orientation to what that really means. What's going to be required? What are we looking for when we ask people to serve as hosts through the night? It's really not terribly complicated, but being educated about this would only serve you well. So please grab a cup of coffee after the church service and make your way to room 201, and there will be, again, a brief orientation session to get you kind of to the level now where you have a much clearer picture of exactly what is entailed. Second announcement has to do, of course, with our Solstice Celebration, which will be this Thursday, the 21st. It's a good time to have a Solstice Celebration. And if you don't have your tickets yet, please be sure to pick up your tickets. The price of the tickets, don't forget, this is a fundraiser. However, fundraiser / we want everybody there. And so if the ticket prices scare you away initially, be scared no more. Everybody is welcome, and for those who can afford the ticket prices for our fundraiser to help our youth make their pilgrimage to Boston later in 2018, it would be a great help. So be sure to pick up your tickets following the service. And then last but not least, it's a save the date announcement. And that is there's going to be I don't know what you call it, but you have to be careful how you phrase it. They are calling it Friends of Tom Goldsmith, because we can't say church, so it's the Friends of Tom Goldsmith. And I argued, I said, I don't have that many friends, but they seem to want to go with that. And that is, Jim DeBacchus, who has been our auctioneer for the last couple of years, and our hero up at the State House. He is, as we got indication, he is a very funny guy. And he's doing a program called Jim Jabs at the Salt Lake Acting Company. And Friends of Tom Goldsmith are invited to go to a 6 o'clock performance on Sunday, January 14th at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, January 14th at the Salt Lake Acting Company. We will tell you how to get your tickets. The tickets, or at least those Friends of Tom Goldsmith, will also hang around following the performance for a exquisite wine and cheese social, and Jim will be there, and he'll probably continue telling his funny stories. So please mark your calendars, January 14th, 6 o'clock, Salt Lake Acting Company, and stay tuned how to get those tickets. The offering will now gratefully be received, a chance to greet one another and hopefully infect each other with a Christmas spirit. By the way, I'm not boycotting the doxology. I've been asked not to sing it. Apparently, for those people in Elliott Hall, it's a frightening experience. And so I just want to be clear. You know, I sometimes wonder, I don't know how it comes into my mind, but I sometimes wonder about the old TV show, To Tell the Truth. Do you remember To Tell the Truth? Oh, yeah, okay. There was always one person with an unbelievable story and two imposters. And the panel, after an extensive round of questions, had to guess which one was the authentic personality. And so I tried to imagine Jesus on the show, where one contestant claims to be a healer, and the other sounds convincing as a teacher, and the third claims to be a revolutionary. And then the host, if you remember his name, Bud Collyer, would ask, "Will the real Jesus please stand up?" And all three of them stand up. And everybody's right, and the panel is confused, and the audience gets angry. And still, nobody knows who the real Jesus is. And that's pretty much, I think, where we find ourselves today. There are a lot of great and convincing stories about Jesus, but how do we identify what is true? How far do we want to go in suspending belief? How much do we want to credit religious traditions? How relevant to our modern times do we intend to make him? Interpreting Jesus can be very personal. So it would be unwise for me to pretend to speak on behalf of the Unitarian viewpoint as though there were one definitive perspective called Unitarian. But I do hope to make a few distinctions this morning in the various approaches to this virtually impossible pursuit of understanding Jesus. My methodology may well be considered a Unitarian approach. So first of all, I really want to begin on an historic note and make it absolutely clear that not one of the four Gospels provide anything remotely resembling a documentation of Jesus' life. There are no eyewitness accounts. We have the Apostle Paul offering the first intimations of Jesus with his conversion on the road to Damascus, and then the subsequent letters, which were written about 20 years following Jesus' death. Paul never met Jesus in the flesh. But that was a small consideration for Paul because he believed adamantly that everything about Jesus, everything, had to rely on one thing and one thing only, and that was faith. It was all a matter of faith. That's all that was important. So Paul offers testimonies of Jesus, as do the four Gospels, without ever having met, let alone having seen, Jesus. The Gospel of John, for example, was written 100 years after Jesus died. Now, here's an important distinction we ought to highlight. The four Gospels tell about Jesus the Christ, not Jesus the man. It's an important distinction because the question of should Jesus be interpreted as divine or human was a question that was raised way, way back at the very beginning by the early church fathers. So if you can imagine, going back 2,000 years ago, some argued as though they were Unitarians. The debate, which is still alive and well in 2017, expresses contrary views about what is called Christology. Was Jesus divine or human? And that's the subject matter, that's the meat and potatoes of what constitutes Christology. Okay. The issue of Christology was addressed head-on in the Gospel of Matthew when Jesus asks his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And this evokes the famous response by Peter, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And what this does, really, essentially, is point to having a faith in Jesus as the Christ. But the other side of the argument from the very beginning maintained, not so fast, buddy. There's a huge gulf that exists between the Christ of faith and the Jesus of history. The real Jesus, those early Unitarians would argue, even though they didn't know they were Unitarians, the real Jesus was a man who, when you think about it, objectively, Jesus was a man who did not succeed. He did not succeed in transforming society as much as he had hoped. And so those liberals 2,000 years ago would insist that the disciples invented a resurrection, and with it, a religion trying to make sense of Jesus' failure. The Unitarian Albert Schweitzer stepped into the fray in 1906 with his publication, The Quest of the Historical Jesus. He applied sound, rational Unitarian principles of inquiry, but essentially joined the long-standing movement of scholars who sought to discover Jesus' history as a way of learning more about the man. Now, in trying to piece together a profile of Jesus, a profile that does not rely on faith. Okay, so this is very much a Unitarian approach. Okay, let's look at Jesus and not rely on faith. Let's be really objective about this. If we do this, it becomes necessary to delve into what is called hermeneutics. And hermeneutics is a term that, unless you're in theological school, puts a lot of people off. It's, oh God, that's when you go to sleep. But all hermeneutics really is an attempt to get a clearer picture of Jesus, hermeneutics of Jesus, get a clearer picture of Jesus through understanding the context of the times in which he lived. So hermeneutics, the mainstay, one might say, of all liberal religious theological investigations, tries to piece together the reality of the times in order to shape a more authentic picture of Jesus. What was going on back then? It's kind of important to our understanding. And this investigation, liberals say, in explaining hermeneutics, is not a matter of moving closer to faith, but it means coming closer to understanding the truth, the reality. What was happening then that really inspired this man to take command of the times in which he did. In a typical Unitarian manner, the quest is not about nourishing faith and all its mystical qualities associated with Jesus, but getting at a real and authentic understanding of who this man was and also what made him tick. And so these Unitarian-type liberals aim to provide an historic and economic context by which Jesus' humanity emerges more fully given the real life circumstances in Jerusalem, Galilee, Capernaum, in roughly the year 1. The year 1 was a really interesting time. It was a time when the apocalyptic urgency hung rife in the air. Anticipation was pretty widespread that a Messiah would bring about a needed change. Notice the vocabulary. Hezekiah, who led peasant revolts against Roman influence, he did this from small towns such as Bethlehem. Hezekiah referred to himself as the Messiah. He led a group of men called the bandits who would attack Romans because they felt that they were in charge of God's retributions. King Herod, who was dispatched to take care of these skirmishes, cut off Hezekiah's head. Herod was only 15 years old at the time. Rome recognized his services by calling Herod King of the Jews. Caesar Augustus was known as the Son of God. So this kind of lingo was definitely percolating at that time. And so with all the talk and expectations of a Messiah, I'm reminded of the difference between Jewish and Christian theologies. Jews would say, the world is so harsh and cruel and unjust, when will the Messiah come? And Christians would say, the Messiah has come, so why is the world so harsh and cruel and unjust? So let's take a moment to contextualize Jesus' life at that time, and I think you'll find it interesting. We all think of Jesus, what were his beginnings? Oh yeah, carpenter and all that. There's only one verse in the entire Bible, in the New Testament, that makes reference to Jesus' occupation as a woodworker or builder. It was probably closer. As a day laborer, Jesus would have belonged to the lowest class of peasants in first century Palestine, just above indigent, beggar, and slave. 97% of the Jewish peasantry could neither read nor write. In all likelihood, Jesus would have had the most rudimentary grasp on Hebrew, barely enough to understand the scriptures when they were read in synagogue. Hebrew was the language of the scribes and scholars. Peasants like Jesus would have had an enormous difficulty communicating in Hebrew, which is why so much of the scripture has been translated into Aramaic, the primary language of the Jewish peasantry. As we know, Aramaic is the language of Jesus. You understand why. So for the record, Luke's account of Jesus standing at the temple at age 12, debating the finer points of Hebrew scripture with rabbis and scribes. Or take Luke's account of Jesus at the synagogue in Nazareth reading from the Isaiah scroll. These are all fabrications. There was not even a synagogue in Nazareth to begin with. So we need to understand that the Gospels are, again, testimonies of faith, not an account of Jesus' history. In studying Jesus, I think Unitarians are drawn more to Jesus' awareness and subsequent penetrating message having to do with this huge, going back now at the beginning, this huge economic divide in his time between the absurdly rich and the indebted poor. Jesus offered a direct challenge to the wealthy and the powerful. And as time went on, Jesus became increasingly confrontational. He highlighted the hypocrisy of the high priests when he said, "They devour the homes of widows and make long prayers for the sake of appearance." Well, not that much has changed. And now, as conservatives preach the gospel of wealth, the liberals, in some way, are rediscovering Jesus. And in the spirit of Thomas Jefferson, we underscore the religion of Jesus, not the religion about Jesus. So we're listening to his teaching, his words, the egregious injustice, the division between rich and poor, not the religion about Jesus, the matters of faith and miracles and so on and so forth. But as Unitarians increasingly absorb the radical elements of this Che Guevara type peasant, we stop to wonder, how do we measure a successful revolution? Jesus was essentially a failure in creating change, but he planted seeds of revolt that continue to inspire us even today as the gap between rich and poor become ever wider. Bold hypocrisy remains the posture among the powerful with us today, and justice seems as out of reach as ever in the history of the world. So even if we use, the language of Jesus, is it fair for us to ever expect God's kingdom to come down, blanket the earth with peace and justice? At least at Christmas time, we are reminded of the yearning for peace, justice, goodwill. And as in undergraduate school, my philosophy 101 professor insisted, anything imaginable is possible I've kept that with me all these many years. Anything imaginable is possible. And I include the kingdom of God. It's imaginable, it is possible. What Jesus provided for us, like all great revolutionaries, was a relentless spirit of imagination. And that we must never cease imagining a world of peace and justice. It's a vision that ultimately awakens us to the intrinsic responsibilities we have in this venture called human existence. The call to creating a just world is basic to our understanding of human purpose. And as the self-righteous evangelical Roy Moore testified, that God will decide the outcome of the election, it seems that God did decide the outcome of the election, and we need to acknowledge that God fundamentally is a liberal.
Does God really love everyone? How wide is the love of God? Does it extend to, say, aliens? Well, if there was ever a Christian denomination that would answer in the affirmative, it would have to be the Universalists. Retired UU minister Beverly Bumbaugh recalls the Universalist Convention of 1959, the same year that saw the birth of the Mercury space program. She writes, "The Unitarians were meeting in a nearby hotel while we Universalists were convened in the downtown church. Both groups were involved in a momentous dialogue concerning the joint statement that would affect the merger of the two denominations. While we waited at one point for a reconsideration of the place of Jesus, the next day's newspaper headlines read, 'Jesus in, Jesus out.' Someone brought forward a resolution reflecting not only recent efforts at extraterrestrial exploration, but the Universalist message of all-embracing love. It is a little-known resolution amidst all the attempts, before and since, to express our collective concerns about social issues. Some even thought it facetious. Nonetheless, it passed, and I think it still stands as a call to celebrate the fundamental love that encompasses the whole interdependent web of existence. Be it resolved that this 1959 biennial session of the Universalist Church of America counsels the highest level of humane respect for such forms of life or societies as may be encountered in the universe. Well, it isn't the most controversial resolution the Universalists ever passed, but perhaps one of the funnier ones, at least to our 21st century minds. Nevertheless, it reveals the radical message of the Universalists, a love so boundless that nothing in the world, in the universe, can be found outside it. Though the message of universalism has often evolved in tone and theology over the years, it has always been tethered to a few core ideas: a God of love and mercy and unwavering compassion, and a circle drawn wide enough to include all of humanity. The first and final principles of our conjoined faith, the inherent worth and dignity of all humans, and the interdependent web of all existence, pay tribute to our universalist heritage. But more than that, they are the drawing out of the ultimate conclusions of universalist Christianity, that God could not create human beings with all of our flaws and then create a hell just to condemn us and remain God. And its corollary, that God could not create us with all of our capacity for love and goodness and not find some way to save us all. Since that imaginative resolution was passed 58 years ago, the religious journey of Unitarian Universalists has, for the most part, led us away from much consideration of Jesus, a distant prophet, all too human, whose name is at least as much a political symbol and cultural weapon as an object of veneration these days. At its peak in the 1830s, the Universalist Church was the 9th largest denomination in the United States. But by the time it merged with the Unitarian Church, its membership had dwindled to only about 40,000 universally saved souls. America had just launched into space, and from that lonely vantage point, we either saw a cold and chaotic universe in which the idea of a loving creator seemed quaint, or we saw a lovely globe filled with diverse and fascinating religious traditions that must all be either salvific or ridiculous in either equal measure. Jesus out, it would seem, but not so fast. For people everywhere still seek a Messiah, a new hope for our collective liberation from the wicked messes in which we find ourselves, hope for salvation from oppression and evil. Don't believe me? Ask yourself, what movie premiering this weekend also features a new hope? In the form of The Last Jedi, that is, and how many times you or your friends are planning to go see it. Yes, we are hungry for salvation. We lie down in the evenings, finally breathing a sigh of relief for having made it through the day. And in our private and vulnerable moments, we ask ourselves if we will ever make it where we are going. We turn off the news, disgusted with the chaos and terror of things, and we wonder if this old world will ever be a fair and happy place to live. Even one moment of justice would slake our thirst and give us hope for another day. If God means to save the whole universe, then why doesn't God just get busy and come down here and do it already? But at Christmas, it is the time of year when we can dare to say, Jesus in. Because after all, this is the time of year when we hear the story of how God did get busy and come down here and save the world. Now, does this story require convoluted theological constructions or miracle narratives in order to be effective? Not really. Because although those parts of the story add depth and richness to the messianic myth, those aren't the parts where the salvation occurs. How did Jesus save people? By connecting with them and loving them right where they were. Skeptics and scholars, saints and sinners, Jesus saw through the categories that divide people, saw right down to their deep human goodness. The best stories of Jesus are the stories in which he stops and takes the time to be really present to another person's need. The people who receive the gift of Jesus' undivided presence describe the encounter as healing. We who are humanists and Unitarians affirm the humanity of Jesus. He was a human, just like we are. Yet in this season of Christmas, we also affirm that he has become so much more. Jesus as the incarnation of God. If God is not a personality, but a presence, then Jesus is the embodiment of that presence. And we who are Universalists affirm that we too contain the presence of the holy, and we too have the capability to be present for others. It is by the discipline of presence, being present to the life of another person, that we save one another. And that is actually how we can be saved ourselves. By laying down the ego to witness the way others encounter the world, and by letting that witness transform us. By being humble and willing to sacrifice our own desires in order that no one else may suffer. By answering only to the highest impulses we can recognize. That is the incarnation, not limited to the life of Jesus or to any one person. As Universalists, we acknowledge that we all participate in the incarnation, and that is how we get saved. And so, when the flying saucer finally lands in your yard, when the little green people walk down the ramp and greet you in their strange language, let's hope it happens at Christmas time, when the inspiration of Jesus is fresh on our minds. May we greet them and all beings with the presence of the holy. And may we be salvation for one another at this time of year and always. So may it be. And now, I invite you to rise in body or in spirit, and let's sing together number 20, Be Thou My Vision.
May the light around us guide our footsteps and hold us fast to the best and most righteous that we seek. May the darkness around us nurture our dreams and give us rest so that we may give ourselves to the work of our world. Let us seek to remember the wholeness of our lives, the weaving of light and shadow in this great and astonishing dance in which every one of us moves. Amen.